Right, Beezer. Thank you so much for joining me on this Media Masterminds podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited. I think it's a fascinating topic.
Awesome. So want to kick it off. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Beezer Clarkson with Sapphire Partners. And Sapphire Partners is the LP arm of Sapphire. So what we do as a team is we invest in early stage venture funds, emerging and established US, Europe, and Israel. And I personally have been doing venture in some form or another, predominantly LP side for the last 15 years, but started my career in 2000 on the direct side. So have had experience on both.
Awesome. And of course, we know you have been on a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of media appearances talking about the new program that you all just launched with CalSTRS. I want to frame the conversation just talking about that, even though we'll focus more on the media side of things. I want to make sure that the audience is aware of that new program because I think it will help further the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So we were really excited to announce in mid-September that what we've done is we've taken on let me back up and say CalSTRS, to their ever amazing credit, has been investing in emerging managers, both on the private equity as well as the venture side now for decades. And they've been running a specific program for the last, I think since early 2000s, which we've acquired. So we've acquired a legacy portfolio of theirs of emerging managers, as well as the go forward. So with them, we'll be focusing on emerging managers in US venture. So I'm going to say this again, because I know sometimes folks get confused. And it's the work that we do with CalSTRS for emerging managers is US VCs investing in US companies. But we'll be taking their go forward on that. To do, and we announced that in September, and we're very excited. And for CalSTRS, for people that don't know them, they are the world's largest educator pension. So they have all the teachers' pensions in California, and we feel an immense amount of gratitude and responsibility to be investing their money.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge deal. And so for the emerging managers listening, what do you look for, right? And I think a question for myself, honestly, is how does it differ from Fund 1 to Fund 3? Right? Because Harlem Capital is on Fund 2, right? Fundraising for Fund 3. So I'm curious, obviously the criteria, the process internally that you do for your diligence must change over time, right? So how does that evolve and what are you really looking for over that evolution?
So parts of it do evolve because you as a manager evolves. Our process doesn't really change. We use the same process. We also invest in established managers. We use the same process. We use the same filter. And the filter is if you're predominantly investing into Series A exposure, we look at, can this fund be a 3x net? What needs to be true? Do we believe it's possible? If it's a seed or pre-seed, we look at, can it be a 5x net? And that filter is true regardless. And we would do later stage investments and use the same criteria. It's just harder to see. I wish that it happens, but it's harder to see a $3 billion later stage vehicle being a 3x net. I mean, I know it has happened, but that's why we focus where we focus. It's our return potential. What changes is the data that you have to work with and how and then it moves with the data, right? And so if it's a Fund 1, you have to look at things like what is Nicole done prior to this fund that would give me reason to believe that she has this potential to be this kind of investor. And then what kind of fund is she putting together? And does that feel resonant with the opportunity set you're going for and the entrepreneurs and all that? And then as you progress from Fund 1, 2, and 3, you get more data points on what the firm looks like and you can understand better how it's coming together. Even if it's a solo GP, right? There's just different nuances and portfolio selection. What kind of companies are resonating? How are you choosing to go to market? All those things. How are you competing? You have more data to understand. But it's the same filter as you just have different inputs.
Got it. And so what are those specific inputs that you look for, right? So let's say it's a Fund 1 emerging manager, right? Maybe they've done some angel investments. Is that what you're looking for? Or if they're targeting diverse founders, do they have the proper networks to access those diverse founders or that top talent? So I guess what are the tangible inputs that people can focus on? And if I'm pitching Beezer as a Fund 1 manager, right? What do you want to see from me?
Yep. Well, we did, in case we want to put it in the speaker notes, we do have a landing page where we talk a bit about the parts. We really like, this sounds very old school, but it really helps us process, is to get a deck in advance with certain components. And I would say somebody the other day, shout out, I didn't ask their permission to say their name, but they sent me a Loom video that gave 3 minutes of talking points over the PowerPoint, and it was amazing. amazing. If I could wave a magic wand and have that happen always, it was just the best, because I get why people do video submissions now, is all I can say. And it's dumb, and I should have realized earlier. But what we talk about on this page about what we want to see is the team. We really want to know who the people are, what you've done, not just the logos of the schools, but talk to us about who you are as people, so that we can translate what it is you're then going to invest in. And I would say the closer the similarities are, the easier it is to understand. It's not that one can't pivot and change. It just needs more translation at that point, right? And we, again, because we are what's called an institutional LP, we're trying to understand, how much do you understand of the venture market? And have you managed somebody else's money before? Because again, like, we're investing teachers' pensions, which is very different from someone who's investing their own capital, and there's different risks tolerances. So we are running an emerging manager program, but I don't think we haven't yet, let me put it this way, invested in somebody who's never invested somebody else's capital, even if it's just at the scout level or angel list. There's just, do need folks to be audited. There are things like that, which if you're running your first $5 or $10 million fund, you don't have to. And that's great, right? And one should lean into that and have that experience. But we'll be looking for those kind of pieces of information. And we want to know, if you have invested, what kind of check sizes, what are you looking at doing? And then what are you looking at with your portfolio construction in this new vehicle? And again, we're looking for, how does that align? If you've written 5K or 10K checks, now you want to write $1 million check, of being slightly different ends of the spectrum here. That's a big jump. And again, it doesn't mean to say you can't do it, but we want to understand that's what you're looking at. Versus if you were writing 200K checks before and you're writing 200K checks, again, like, that's an easier thing to say, oh, I understand your playbook. And we also, the other part that's harder to bring out in PowerPoint, although I've seen people do it, is really the why you. Like, to your example, the underrepresented founder, yes, there are a lot of them for reasons that are painful, right? Like, there's a lot of folks that don't get a fair shake in the system. But that alone is not sufficient, right? Why are they going to pick you? What is you raise that you could be an LP, come be an LP, right? What is the network that you have? Why are they going to pick you? And then the other part that we're listening for is, what are you looking for in their business that makes you think it can be a significantly large business? And we do have a preference for software heavy companies. And I know venture has expanded into other scopes, but as a preference, we like to understand that. And so I know it's a lot to say to put it to a deck. It's not impossible, but those are the things that we're really trying to understand.
So out of curiosity, from a numbers perspective, how many decks do you get, and how many calls or initial calls do you take?
Oh, I don't run these numbers, and we stopped. But here's what I can tell you. We do get, we got a few hundred in the last 2 months. So like, we get, I don't know if that equates to thousands per year. Well, there are now thousands of emerging managers, and that's just emerging managers. And because we also work in Europe and Israel, we have other geographies too. And this is one of the reasons why we can tack into this, that we try to heavily leverage social media and OpenLP so that we can have one-to-many and many-to-many channels. Because I don't, if you have a way of hacking more than having 24 hours in your day, let me know how you do it. Because I'm sure you have a gazillion entrepreneurs trying to talk to you. And we don't have enough time in the day. And so we have developed these, one of the reasons why we do what we do is because we think it's in service to the industry. And it allows us to connect with a lot more folks than we can do if we're just trying to do back-to-back Zooms. So we do it, and we do have a team. It's not just me, obviously, but I try to underscore that, because the only reason why Sapphire Partners is who we are is because we're a team. And it's really integral to how we go to market and how we make our magic happen.
Totally. I mean, for us, we're a team of 7 now. So we have 6 members in the US, 1 in the Philippines who's in EA. And we extend our 24 hours in a day by our intern program, because we double our team size 3 times a year. So it's a little trick. It's our secret sauce as a firm. They do amazing work for us. They help us on the deal side. They do projects. They do our media. So some of the blog posts are written by our interns. And so anyway, I don't know if you want to start an intern program at Sapphire Partners, but it does help. It does help.
Well, if one of your interns wants to tell me how to run an intern program that could help do that, I'm all in. Because that would be an interesting learning curve. I don't know if there's that many people that want to intern as an LP. I think more people want to intern as a GP, but I'm open to it. I'm happy to learn from you guys.
I mean, I think you could get some people. I think you could get some folks, but we'll chat offline about that because I think it could add more than 24 hours in your day. Last note on this new program before we move on to media and its superpowers. I'm curious, when you're looking at new EMs, and you mentioned this, how much of their portfolio construction do you look at? So do generalists win? Do specialists win? Thesis driven? Whether they lead deals or participate, like how much of that fund construction are you looking at? And you said software is your main like goal as a company that they invest in, but anything outside of that?
So I would say what we are not allocating to is sort of healthcare specific activities. Like CalSTRS has done healthcare work and they're using that in different vehicles. So we are not doing healthcare. And we also have a portfolio allocation strategy, just like GPs do. So we might find that at any given year, we are fully allocated to a certain area within software, but within those caveats, we're very open-minded. So the simplest answer is we want to understand as much as you are willing to share with us, because I do see things I think will make it much harder for GPs to achieve a 3X or a 5X. But there's always something new for us to learn and how they do it. So I'm not opposed to a generalist or specialist. We don't have prescribed ways of saying you can't, or it has to be concentrated. It can't be X, Y, and Z. We learn every day, but there are certain guardrails that we can say, which is, I'm going to be hyperbolic. If you want to do $1 billion fund and only have a 1% stake in 2,000 companies, the math is going to work against you. But that doesn't mean to say you can't. We've seen success be done in a multitude of ways. And that's one of the things that I adore about venture. But I would say a lot of emerging managers just haven't had the experience set to then understand, what does this mean for my potential outcomes? And an LP like us is going to think that way. So it could be that we're just not the right LP at this time while someone's trying to figure out what they want to do. Or we're going to ask them, and this is part of why we provide this information, is to know you need to think through this. If you want to raise this kind of capital, you have to be prepared to understand how your portfolio is going to work. But there's successful syndication strategies. All of this just demands, if I back it up, I would say the people that I see being successful, if I was to do a trend line, it's really folks that sit down and really think through what's happening. And everyone calls it first principles. I think these terms get thrown around and then people don't dig into what it means. And my experience over the last year is the folks that are coming through this time, the established as well as the emerging managers, really are sitting down and saying, what do we believe is true about us as investors? What do we believe about the world? How do we do this? What do we need to do to have the kind of firm and the kind of fund that we want? And if they can express that perspective, like that's authentic and unique. And it's really powerful. And you just see this consistently in the market, and it can come in any shape and form, which is part of the awesome diversity of the ecosystem.
Yeah. During our diligence process, we sort of have those questions of like teasing out if you're being authentic about what you're building, right? Which is so important for longevity. And some of the questions we ask what keeps you up at night? What does success look like outside of like a monetary gain, right? So it's like trying to be like, tease out that authenticity, and are you doing what you sort of want to be doing, and does it make sense for you, right? Like being truly introspective of like, am I the best person on this planet to do what I'm trying to do?
Yes. And it's also, venture is incredibly long-term.
So long-term.
So long-term. And I fear that a lot of people that have started in venture in the last 5 years, and let me caveat this and say, I think it's totally fine if people decide not to continue to do funds. Don't abandon your portfolio companies. But it's, each vehicle is like 15 to 18 to 20 years. And this is not for just a hard tech. Like software vehicles of the greats that you've heard of are still 18 years old, right? And that is the first fund. It is a long, long term. So if you want to do something and dabble or try, which we all should, I would say raising from institutional LPs, it might not be the best way of doing it. Like there are other vehicles now in the market, which is phenomenal, like AngelList, or you could do family, like sort of family and friends, and different ways of saying, I want to try this for, 5 years, 10 years, and then maybe I'll be done. It's just a really different road. And I think it's become so common to think, oh, I'll just start a venture fund. It's not, you're kind of building a financial institution that's supposed to be around for 40 years. Like that is not, like it's longer than marriages. Like your kid's not going to be at home that long. Like all these, it's really long term.
I know. There are fewer long-term decisions you could make in your life, truly.
Oh, OpenLP is probably the only one.
Yeah, PLP is probably the only one. Okay, I want to shift gears into talking about media and its superpowers. And I am very curious in digging in with you on the difference of using social media as an emerging manager versus an established manager. And I think internally at Harlem Capital, we go back and forth a lot about this. We use media as a strategy for us. Obviously, we have over 600K followers across all of our channels across the team. And it has gotten us in doors that we otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten in if we didn't have that media presence. And I think for Harlem Capital, back 5-7 years ago, we had to create the market in a lot of ways, right? The diversity market almost didn't exist as a concept, right? And so we used media as a way to propel that market forward and bring awareness. But I think now, obviously, emerging managers have the choice to be on social media or not. And so I'm curious from an LP perspective that invests in emerging managers, how do you think about social media presence? And I think, building a brand, you can build a brand without social media, but curious how you really view having a media following in your diligence process or as a way to build a brand. I'm just curious.
I think, well, let me first say congratulations. Amazingly impressive what you guys have built and the social media and all the followership and I've loved following your Twitter. And I learn from your Twitter all the time. And I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Is this what people are thinking and doing? And how does it work? And so that's my favorite kind of social media. So and I know it takes a lot of work, right? The other part of it, I know you talked about this a bit on your podcast you dropped with Nicole Wischoff. Like it's not without its effort right. And so one of the things that I think about when we're talking to funds and they're explaining why they're doing what they're doing, and if they have social media and they're not talking about it, we'll always invite them to talk about it, is how does it support your strategy? And it can be a range, right? You gave so many great points as to why it can be super supportive of strategy. But if someone is spending a significant amount of time, even if it's only an hour a day, that still adds up. How does that benefit the strategy? Like all parts of this should be leading the firm forward or feeding you as a human so that you can then lead the firm forward in other ways. It can be a range of reasons. But understanding why we always just lead with that. Like, how's it working? Why is it working? And then I'm always personally curious, what can I learn from how it's done? Because I think we're also scratching the surface, to be honest. Like, go people on TikTok. Oh my goodness, I have no idea how to do that. It's so fascinating. And the Reds, it's always evolving. So we're not, if the question is, are you opposed? No, but we want to understand why. And I would also say, and we hold ourselves to the standard too, there's times when I literally am like, I can't do social media right now. I got the day job is very important and I have to go focus on that. And the team goes to focus on that. And so there's times when we basically just peace out because we're like, we got to go do stuff. And people are like, why are you tweeting about XYZ? And you're like, well, because I'm doing XYZ. So it's sort of the nice way of saying if it feels like someone is spending a disproportionate amount of time doing something that's might be fun for them as individuals, but is it necessarily supportive of the firm side, but they're doing it during sort of firm hours, for lack of a better way of saying it? Like, we're also sensitive to that.
Sure. Yeah. So it's more about proving that the social media is bringing some tangible ROI, whether it's increasing your sourcing funnel, so things like that.
Brand, I would say I'm not the expert on this. A lawyer would be better on this than I would be. But one of the things I've found it's amazing about social media, and this started with rolling funds, and we've seen it now with the ability to incorporate a fund that allows for public discussion around your fundraising. It is amazing to me in the best possible way how funds get raised essentially on social media, which I don't think, given the rules against pre-marketing, you could do before. And also some of the social stigma, which I think is weird and I don't understand it, but it definitely seems to be one of those things where people didn't want to talk about it in advance. And what I've seen emerging managers do, which I just think is fantastic, is the build in public, the community support community, the celebration, hey, I'm hosting an event, please come. There's rolling funds that I don't have the permission to name, but I do not think they would have existed if they tried to come to market in a traditional manner, possibly because they didn't have the track record, but they need to build the track record to then prove to other people, or they were non-traditional backgrounds. And again, for all the systemic and ism flaws in the system, they may have been really challenged to fundraise, and yet they've been able to fundraise now. And again, it presumes some level of marketing capabilities, but if they have that tool set, being able to deploy it on behalf of fundraising versus the, do you know 5 people that sit in large endowments, which is its own skill set, but is exclusionary. I just think so. I think it's phenomenal. Like, I have just been so happy to watch that over the last, I don't know, what do you think, 5, 6, it definitely predated COVID, but it got accelerated during COVID.
Yeah. And I guess the question is, you're very open to having a media presence if it is fruitful for the fund. When you look at your LP peers, what would you say sentiment is across that set, right? Because I think there, it's a pretty contrarian view, it seems, for most, to have a large media following in the finance space, right? It can have its negatives, but I'm curious. Yeah. So I'm curious, what do your LP peers think? And if an emerging manager is going to you, but also going to your peers, do you think they're going to be met with a bit of backlash because of their audience?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't have a definitive answer. I've not surveyed. I would assume if they were able to translate into this is how it works for us, it would be receptive, because, and the analogies I'm drawing, before the days of social media, you'd have GPs doing conferences, other ways of amassing brand and many to many. And for those that could utilize it in a way that generated, again, the same things, the same net attributes, right? Deal flow, insights, connectivity, new network expansion. I saw LPs backing those funds. So my presumption is some LPs liked it. Maybe some LPs didn't, but there was enough out there that they could build a base. When you sent me the questions, I was thinking of analogies in like the old days. And we just use conferences, and people set up their own conference series, and people used, I should have pulled the date on this. It was so long ago, like the original Sequoia Rest in Peace pitch deck. I mean, it's not social media by definition. And Sequoia obviously had a very strong brand prior to that, but I mean, everybody was talking about it. I'm not sure if it made the cover of the Wall Street Journal, but everybody was talking about it. So there were tools that people used way back when. And again, these funds were funded, so LPs had to be receptive. Now, are there some that would think it's not the new way of doing social media? Is it all the negatives? Is it distracting? Is it too much in public? I think there are some things I've seen LPs. I think LPs can also, I would say this, when people are posting things in public, be conscious that you're posting it in public. Some people post very personal things. Like, I do not post my son on Twitter. If you want to see pictures of my son, you have to come on the podcast, and you have to be friends with me on my personal social media, because it's just, I'm not going to talk about what I had for breakfast. I'm unlikely to talk about when I'm walking down a street. Like, I keep it very in the land of this is useful LP information. But I love the fact that if people are willing to share other aspects, I can understand their day, but it does mean you're telling people about your day, and it can be two-sided. I don't know. How do you choose what you do and don't do?
So I think it's funny, right? Because when I started my journey at Harlem Capital, they suggested that I have a media presence to build my brand. But I didn't know how to do that, because I personally don't use social media that much. And so I basically picked 5 topics that I thought I could be uniquely qualified to talk about, and whittled them down. So I A/B tested them every day. I tweeted once in the morning, once at night, about those same 5 topics for a few months. I realized very quickly that there were some topics nobody wanted to hear from me about, and that was totally fine. So I started cutting them down, right? So I went from 5 topics to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, which is now demystifying VC. And all of it was done very methodically, actually. And that's how I choose what I post, right? And now I feel like I have a good pulse on what I know will do well and what people want to see. And I am almost always right about it. And I think what I've learned about what to post is people want niche content, and they want to know what to come to you for, right? And so if people hear somebody ask, how do I break into VC? More often than not, people are going to say, go to Nicole's Twitter. She has a lot of resources there. Or go to Nicole's LinkedIn. She has a lot of resources there. And I've had VCs come up to me and say, you've made my life easy because I just redirect people. And so I think even though it seems like maybe I just fell into demystifying VC, it was very much a project, and it was very, very methodical in the way that I went about it. And I just listened to the audience, really. It's funny because nobody actually knows that it was this unsexy thing, right? I literally said to myself, I was like, if I have to build a media presence, I have to treat it like any other work project. How am I going to get it done? And there was a divorcing of it from like personal social media and, you know, my relationship with it in my everyday, right? I had to like mentally get out of that and just realize that like any other project, you have to get it done. And that's what happened. But I do want to ask you, is there such a thing as too much exposure for funds in your eyes?
That's an interesting question. I would imagine it's not impossible, right? I think it gets to the question you had about would LPs perceive it being distracting? Because the analogy I make is, and this is very stereotypical, but like back in the day was, how many hours a day are you spending time golfing, Mr. or Mrs. VC? And is that useful for doing deals? And it used to be, believe it or not, I know this sounds so old fashioned, but people used to say, oh, and it probably was very true to some extent, was, oh, but I do all these deals on the golf course. So it's very useful. And literally, so my son is a few years from going to college, and I'm like, I am going to learn how to golf as my like empty nest project because I want to go out there and do these deals. I'm so excited. I'm probably like 3 decades too late, but I'm all about it. So let me know how to learn. I'll be the caddy. I'll figure it out. It also becomes a question of, if it's one person in the firm that's carrying the torch, then like, let's say like on the beautiful side of things, like Fred Wilson was like such an important venture blogger for so long. And he still is. He's cut down his pace of it, but he had a whole firm. So the fact that the rest of the folks at Union Square, they all now are very involved, but like back in the day, he was really sort of the out in front. And like, is that too much? No, because there's a lot of people involved and he was a very active investor. So it worked. But are there other people that you could look at and say, how do you actually get your work done? It's not impossible, but I mean, now we do have ghostwriters and now we have AI and we have all these tools. So I guess I'm just repeating the same thing, which is I think the bar people could be aware of is an LP could ask the question of, how are you getting your day job done? And as long as that, or there could be times when so much information is shared, it could be a turnoff. Like people will ask me about certain VCs and I'm like, hey, you don't need to ask me. Like just look at their LinkedIn or Twitter and you'll see exactly what they think. And you could like it or not like it, but they're putting it out there. And talk about simplified diligence. I think it's great.
Yeah. I guess it's also a matter of the thoughtfulness at what you're posting, right? Is it relevant to the job? Are you, stirring controversy around your fund? I imagine in those ways, that's where exposure can definitely be too much, right? And so I think the thoughtfulness around the posts matter.
Are you talking about, I think, the kind of sort of like getting canceled and then things of that nature and how people think through those choices?
Yeah, or I guess, there's a lot of VCs who have a lot of opinions on things outside of maybe, what they're uniquely qualified to talk about. And I think there are some people who like controversy for the sake of controversy, right? And so I think in those ways, that's when like there can almost be too much exposure. Where I think it goes back to your point of like personal pages versus professional pages. One lies under the fund name and that brand versus one is sort of your personal brand and posting. So I don't know. I know I personally steer clear of most personal things on my pages because it is my professional outlet. And like you say, if you want to see personal Nicole, there are pages for that, right? But professional Nicole has a very niche topics that she covers. Right. And I'm talking in third person as if it's not me. But I want to shift gears a bit. And I want to talk about the importance of social media to you. Because I've learned an incredible amount from your page. I've learned an incredible amount from OpenLP. And obviously, as you said earlier in this conversation, it takes a lot of time. Right. And I'm curious what propels you to share as much information as you do? And sort of where did OpenLP as a concept come from?
The underlying question is, how does one get up every day? And we've been doing this now for over a decade, which is a long time. I'm not as prolific as you are. OpenLP is now more prolific, but I appreciate, I'm not saying we start tweeting 5 times a day from day one, but we've been doing OpenLP and the thought leadership that I personally and different folks on my team do for quite a while now. The motivation is, I think there's a core underlying motivation for me personally, and that ties into Sapphire Partners, because I think it's hypocritical for me to say, oh, what are you GP doing on social media that's supporting the firm, and then have an LP or me personally be like, oh, but I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. Like, we hold ourselves to the same standard, which is if I'm going to commit my time during the day, right, which I see as Sapphire's time, and if we as Sapphire, launched OpenLP and maintain it and do all the work behind it for the last 10 years, if we're going to do that, it has to be strategic for the firm, right? But we need the energy to get up every day and to care. Otherwise, it's not the right initiative and we should do something else. So the long-winded, short answer to your question is, when I started in venture 20 years ago, these things didn't exist. And I really intrinsically feel it's important. Like, I really feel the venture industry is a wonderful place, but there is still so much better it could be. And I personally would like to be able to help make it the place that I wish that it was when I started 20 years ago. And that's my personal motivation. But then I have to gut check that with, and how is the expression of this then useful for Sapphire Partners and LPs, and a different path, but getting to the same place that you ended up, which is, well, what are we uniquely capable of doing? What does the industry need? What can we maintain? And so you're doing the demystifying the path into venture. We're sort of doing demystifying the LP GP universe, which is humongous, right? So there's endless things to be done. To your point, there's not as many topics that people are interested in as there are topics out there. There's definitely some topics that resonate far more with everybody than others. So we're trying to refocus some of this stuff. Some of the niche things can be very powerful, but they are very nichey. Like, do we want to talk about management fees for a whole podcast? So, and then part of what I believe from observing the world, and it really works with how I think is also useful for us, is that you can get out there every single day and talk about, what do I personally, let's pick on me. What does Beezer believe? Like, or I could try to find something, and this is how OpenLP came about when we were ideating. It was, well, what serves a greater mission? Because I mean, at the end of the day, who wants to hear from one person all the time? Yes, if you're, an incredibly brilliant thought leader with 30 years of experience doing something, and I will listen to so many people that are experts, but when you're starting out, that's just not the case. And there's just not that many people either on the other side of the line. So we're like, what do we do that's useful for the ecosystem and that we can learn and they'll learn, and we can all bring people together? And there was not a platform that amplified other people's voices. And that's part of the magic that we felt OpenLP did. Was, it's not just our voice. Like, we contribute heavily to it, especially at times like now where there's a dearth of other LP content, but we're really happy to step aside and let other people's content rule the day on both OpenLP, and I'm happy to retweet things, although OpenLP does more of that just for time and bandwidth. That's the purpose of it. Because if you can generate more LPs coming to the table or GPs talking about these topics, it's better. We're smarter, you're smarter, the world's smarter. I just fundamentally, as an investor, do not think the arbitrage out there should be that Nicole knows how to make a data room better than Beezer. Like, if that's, or let me reverse it. If that's my only competitive advantage, that's a crappy competitive advantage from a long-time investor standpoint. So there's no need on that. It also should be known how hard it is to return a 3x fund. Because then when emerging managers are starting out, it will not be like, well, what do I need to do? Like, these are things that are not taught in school. There's a whole bunch of financial information that's not taught in school that sort of burned me over the years, where you're like, why don't we talk about 401ks? Why don't we talk about how to balance a checkbook? These things should all be in high school. Why are we not teaching it? Anyway, long-winded answer. But that's all the things that get us up and going. And that's why we created OpenLP. And then there's all the other side effects that you talked about. We meet new people. I know people online that I don't get a chance to meet in person always. They know me, we know them, they know my partners. All those lovely things happen.
Yeah. I really like the point that you made around, you know how to make a data room better than I do, which doesn't actually mean anything, right? It's just an access and education point, which I think is the issue within the VC, LP, GP space in general, right? It's people don't have access, right? And I think it's the same on the venture side, right? Where it's like, if you're interviewing for a job and you don't know the structure of the interview, but your counterpart does, you're obviously not going to succeed as well as your counterpart because you just didn't have access to the information on how to prep. Right. And so it's the same thing. And I know I really appreciate the LP work that you do and publish, because even sitting as a junior at a VC firm, access to LPs and that type of information isn't ubiquitous. Right. And, we're not LP facing because we're not GPs. And so I think even from a junior perspective, like it's been amazing to see all the work that you're doing there. So very much appreciated. I can thank you on behalf of the whole ecosystem.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear because I was a junior person at a firm and I didn't know. I didn't even know what an LP was when I was in a venture firm, because you're not responsible for fundraising. So why should you? And I got to tell you, there's a whole number of very experienced investors who are GPs who are also not primary on the LP relationship, because a lot of firms will end up focusing it for all sorts of awesome, efficiency reasons. But it then also means that a lot of the information, not just who LPs are and what they care about, but what does that then mean for potentially super boring, but very important for returns? Like, what about reserves? What about liquidity? What about follow-on? All that information isn't necessarily discussed. Anyway, all of that exists. We've lived it. We've walked it. We believe in it. So we try to create this to be in service to everybody in venture. But I would say this again, like, it is really hard industry to break into. I got very lucky breaking into it. And part of it is I just think the inequality of education is just not helpful. And doing all that we can to sort of democratize that. You're like, it's hard enough to pick great companies like that. The other stuff should just be table stakes.
Exactly. And I know we're coming up on time. So final question for you. If I'm an emerging manager wanting to raise my fund today, what do you have to say about the market? What advice do you have on approaching LPs at this particular moment?
It is harder. Not going to sugarcoat it. It's definitely a more difficult market. If you are an emerging manager that has not invested somebody else's capital, I would definitely encourage folks to spend time thinking through some of these support structures at AngelList and rolling funds, being a scout, doing all those things to get some experience, and then building up. Do you really want to do this for the next, I don't know, what are we talking, 40 years? 40, not 4. And then as well as, it could also be you want to join a platform. I think the path that you took is underlooked in some respects. Everyone thinks they should just start their own fund, and there's awesome reasons for doing that. There's also really awesome reasons for going to join a platform and to understanding how the business works and then potentially spitting out later. For folks that are already on the path and are 1 and 2, I do think understanding the LP perspective, which is right now, it's very hard to understand valuations. They're just really, this is an established manager challenge. This is an industry-wide challenge. Valuations are kind of all over the place. They're resettling. There's lots of reasons. There's a whole mess we know is out there on the internet. I don't need to explain it. But understanding how to talk about your portfolio development at a pretty granular level, that's not just TVPI, but where my company's at, product market fit, how are they growing, what kinds of businesses are they? Are they cash burn heavy? Are they operating margin? All those nuances, being able to communicate that and the positivities there is very important. And being conscious that it might take longer, and that is traditionally how it worked. The last few years were an aberration. It's not the norm. So you're not going through something that's not uncommon. It doesn't make it better, but it's how venture used to be. So it takes a little bit of time, and it's going to be tough. And I'm just going to open up the door. It might not be for everybody. And we are hearing, I don't think, shockingly, people are not telling me this, but I'm certainly hearing about it in the market, that some emerging managers want to merge with others. They don't want to do it as alone. So they want to hang up their skis, whatever the right sneaker analogy is.
Yeah.
All of these are things to consider. I just think these markets, as a GP said to me, there's a certain level of commercial that a successful fund has to be willing and a successful investor has to be willing to live with. And I think some folks are experiencing that maybe they don't want to do it, and that's fine too. And other folks are going to say, you know what, it's tougher, but like bring it on, right? Because this is the time to dig in and really understand how it works. Because when the good times come back, we know what to do, right? I would say, like, I always offer this. I've had all 360 in my career. The first fund I started, we shut down. That was not fun. Going through down markets teaches you a ton. You are learning incredibly important lessons right now, and carry them forward because they will pay off in spades.
Totally. That's great advice and honest. And that's what we love. Okay, Beezer, thank you so much for joining me. I want one last question. Where can people find you, and where can they find OpenLP?
Sure. So openlp.com. It's also a hashtag on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter as Beezer232. The 232 is a legacy joke literally from 2000, pretty much. So sorry, that's the backstory for other podcasts. It was a joke on me, which I thought was funny, so I carried it forward. And on our Sapphire Partners homepage, you can find the link to the landing page that goes into more depth about what we like to see in a PowerPoint. And I can give it to you, and you can stick it in the speaker notes if that's helpful.
Fantastic. This was jam-packed with great advice for emerging managers. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the work that you do. It's awesome.